Hello everyone, and welcome to Module 2, Lesson 4 of Zero to Permit. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the engineering evaluation. In the previous two lessons, we talked about two of the three components that make up a complete permit application. We talked about forms and we talked about fees. Now, both of these elements are important, and missing even one of them can stall the entire permitting process. So therefore, it's important to have all the elements in place when you submit your permit application. In this lesson, we're going to talk about arguably the most important element of the overall permit application. And so the last and third component of a complete permit application is the detailed engineering evaluation. This engineering evaluation is a technical document, and it includes all of the information needed for the AQMD to process your permit application. The engineering evaluation allows the engineer to determine, based on the information that you provide them, if the equipment can comply, that is, can it be built and operated in a manner that it complies with all of the applicable rules and regulations of the air district. And so the document needs to not only address rules, but it also needs to address new source review, a process that we talked about earlier in this module. Remember from Module 1 that the whole goal of the process or the permit processing process, or the process to process a permit application, is that so the engineer can determine, using the information that you provide, if the equipment can comply with all the applicable rules and regulations that pertain to this piece of equipment, including of all the requirements of how new source review will be met. All of that needs to be boiled into this engineering evaluation. And so it's a very important document. Now, generally, the engineering evaluation can be broken up into 10 components, more or less. And so we work with these 10 components, and we also advise our clients to work with the same. The AQMD actually has a checklist or an outline of how to prepare a complete permit application, and these 10 components can be found within that outline provided by the AQMD. And actually, we'll have a link to the AQMD's version in the notes below, so you can use that as a reference. So number one, you'll need to include information about the facility. You'll need to talk about the facility, the identity of the facility, where you'll talk about basic information such as the name, the location, the address, what type of permit are you applying for. A lot of this information should be information that you previously included on your 400A. You should also match the information that you include on your 400A, because your 400A does have basic information about the equipment or the facility applying for the permit. Number two is that you'll need to include an equipment description for the piece of equipment that you're permitting. And in addition, you also want to describe the piece of equipment using the specific format that is used by the AQMD. Now, you can look this up in section 4.2 of the CPP manual, but just know that there is a specific format that the AQMD will use when describing your permit or your equipment on the face of your permit. And so you want to be sure that this equipment description is correct, because this description will appear on the face of your permit. Number three, you'll need to talk about the facility history, and you want to give an overview of the facility, and you just want to provide more information about what the facility does, some of the compliance history, if they had any problems, what problems had they had in the past. When it comes to the AQMD's rules, the rules are very contextual. And so you want to provide enough information about the facility so that the engineer can go back and determine which rules apply and which ones don't. And so for someone to do that, you want to have enough information or enough context within your permit application to make the engineer, or to help the engineer make that determination. And so as far as a permitting history, for example, you can talk about, how long ago were the first permits issued? What kind of permits were issued for this facility? When were the last permits issued? When were the last permit applications filed, and so forth? You can also talk about the type of permit application being submitted in this current submittal of this permit application. Is it a permit to construct? Is it a permit modification? Is it a change of condition? Is it an admin change? What type of permit application are you submitting? In addition, you'll need to talk about the location of the facility. And you'll not only want to talk about where the facility is located, but you'll also want to talk about the general area around the facility. Because depending on where the facility is located in will determine of whether or not the facility needs to go through a public notification process when going through the standard permitting process. Are there other establishments around the facilities? Are there hospitals? Are there schools? Are there homes? Is it a residential area? Is it a desert? Does the first neighbor live 300 miles away? Whatever the case, all of this information is needed to either determine if public notification is required, or at the very least, it will be needed when you go through your health risk assessment, or when a health risk assessment is performed, and that will be done later on. Number 4 is that you want to talk about the process description. Now, this is simply, a section where you're describing the process, or the process that this equipment will serve. You can talk about the kind of widgets that the process makes, the kind of widgets that the facility makes. In other words, you want to explain or tell the engineer how will this specific piece of equipment support the larger process. Again, you're simply trying to provide more context to the engineer so that it can help them, or you can help them make the determination, or the ultimate determination of whether or not this piece of equipment can comply with all the rules subject to this piece of equipment. Number 5, you want to talk about emissions data. In this case, you want to talk about the sources of data that you'll use to calculate emissions from your piece of equipment. Emissions data, or the data used to calculate emissions, can come from a variety of sources. It can be lookup tables such as AP42. You can use agency documents. It could be SDS or MSDS sheets, manufacturer's data. You could use engineering calculations. You can use an emissions guarantee. It could be a source test, direct measurement. Whatever the case, you want to provide the sources as well as the data that you'll use to calculate emissions for this specific piece of equipment. Number 6, you'll want to calculate, using the data that you just talked about, you want to calculate emissions from your piece of equipment. Now, when it comes to calculating emissions from your equipment, there are 8 emission rates for the criteria pollutants and 3 emission rates for the toxics that will be needed. Now, I'm not going to bore you with all the different emission rates that are needed, but at this point, just know that there are a total of 11 emission rates needed as part of your permit application, and those are 11 emission rates for all the different pollutants. So it'd be criteria pollutants as well as the toxics. So number 7 is you'll need to also do a health risk assessment to be sure that the operation of this piece of equipment doesn't exceed any health risk standards that are provided in rules 1401 or 1402. Again, this is all going to be dependent on the types of toxic emissions from this piece of equipment, and all those data will come from the 3 toxic emission rates that you calculated previously, in addition to the distance to the nearest off-site receptor. And so, who is your closest neighbor? Is there some family on the other side of the facility that has a house there? If so, then that's the nearest off-site receptor. If the nearest receptor is 300 miles away, then that would be the nearest off-site receptor. Whatever the case, you'll need to identify the nearest off-site receptor. And this is important because health risks will be dependent on the distance from your facility to the nearest off-site receptor. The closer the receptor is to your facility, the higher the health risk will be. And then it will tail off as the receptor gets farther and farther away from your facility. And so actually, in 2015, updates were made to the AQMD's health risk guidelines that take into account sensitive receptors. And because of that, the new assumptions or the new data in the new health risk guidelines can actually cause the health risk from your facility to go up. And because of that, you want to be very careful on who's on the other side of your fence. And so all of that needs to be done and assessed during the health risk assessment. And so the point here is that toxic emission rates are needed to be sure that the operation of the equipment doesn't exceed health risk thresholds. And like we said earlier, the AQMD uses guidance documents to help you complete an HRA or a health risk assessment. And we have links to the guidance documents in the notes below, so you can check those out. Number 8 is you need to do a rule evaluation. In this step, you'll need to review all of the rules and discuss how will compliance be achieved. So you'll need to do a thorough analysis for new source review as well as all the other rules. You'll need to assess the need to install BACT or conduct modeling and or the need to buy emission offset credits. And in addition to that, you'll need to go through all the rules to see which ones apply and which ones don't. Usually, and I say usually, most of the rules that people will need to address will be found in regs 2, 3, 4, 9, 10, 11, 13, 14, 17, 20, and 30. And so those are a lot of rules, and you're going to have to be able to analyze all of those rules at scale to see which ones pertain to your piece of equipment. And so number 9 is that you'll want to draft a summary statement and recommendation. Again, what you're trying to do here is you're trying to make a strong case that the equipment will comply with all of the applicable rules and regulations. The summary statement is, again, your last push, to tell the district, yes, if you give us a permit or this equipment will comply with all the rules and regulations that apply to it. Now, if you call out points or actions that you will take to demonstrate compliance from the rule analysis, then you should reiterate them here because you're trying to make the case that compliance will be achieved. And so number 9 is you want to make a strong case that your equipment will comply with all the applicable rules and regulations of the district. And then number 10 is you want to draft up permit conditions. When the AQMD issues your permit, they will impose conditions on the face of your permit. And these permit conditions will be there to ensure compliance with all the rules and regulations of the air district. And so you actually have a say on which conditions you want to see on the face of your permit. And so because of that, when proposing conditions, you want to be sure that the conditions you propose are reasonable. But at the same time, you want to be able to ensure that the equipment can comply with all the rules and regulations. You'll want to consider points that you made in the rule evaluation and then draft conditions accordingly. And most important, you want to be sure that you can do what you say you'll do. If you propose monitoring, then be sure that monitoring equipment can be installed without any problems. In any event, you want to be able, or do you want to be always thinking ahead about how compliance will be demonstrated, or how will you demonstrate compliance with these rules? Kind of got out ahead of myself, but like I said before, if you propose the installation of monitoring equipment, be sure that the equipment can be installed without any problems. And again, you always want to be thinking ahead about how you will demonstrate compliance with the rules. So with that, let's do a little summary. Like we said, a complete permit application contains forms, fees, and a detailed engineering evaluation. The engineering evaluation has 10 components. And to really know how this evaluation will work in the process will require you to understand the role of the AQMD as well as the role of you, the applicant, in the overall permitting process. So again, the role of the AQMD is to review the permit application or the information submitted with the permit application and make a determination if this piece of equipment can operate in compliance with all the rules and regulations of the air district. That's their job. That's their only job. And so it's important that you understand what their job is, because without the information that you will provide them, they can't do their job. And so on the other hand, your role is to provide the engineer at the air district the information so that they can do their job and make that determination. And so again, when you go through this process, you want to keep in mind, number 1, what is the role of the AQMD in the permitting process, and then you want to know what is your role in the permitting process. Your role is to provide the information to the AQMD so that they can make their determination. And when you start to understand that, then you'll be in a better position, or you'll be better prepared to prepare a complete application, because you know what you need to do and you know what the district needs to do. But ultimately, the onus is on you to prepare that complete permit application so that they can do their job. And like we've said before, the single best thing that you can do to get your permit application or your permit from the AQMD as quickly as possible is to submit a complete permit application. And so with that, we've wrapped up Module 2, and we'll see you in Module 3, where we'll talk about strategies that you can use to get your air permit from the Air Quality Management District. Take care.